The extradition attempt on Julian Assange in Britain has failed by the United States. It was interesting. The judge had shot down, the British judge, and had shot down a lot of the arguments that that Assange's lawyer had made in the past. But apparently, the one that she found the most compelling was Assange's health. According to The Guardian, sending him to the U.S. would not breach a bar on extradition for political offenses, she said. She had no reason to doubt that the U.S. constitutional and procedural protections would be applied to a trial he might face in the U.S. However, she found compelling evidence from medical experts, including details on how Assange had suffered from depression while in prison in London. The overall impression in depressed and sometimes despairing man who was genuinely depressed about his future. And I think really it came down to the treatment that the U.S. gave to Chelsea Manning, putting her into isolation, that the Brits find this to be torturous.
Well, it is.
And it is.
Yeah. Like, think about that, though, for a second. Or are you done? I didn't mean to cut you.
Well, I mean, ultimately, they said that they would be afraid that the conditions of isolation in a so-called supermax prison in the U.S. and procedures described by U.S. authorities would not prevent him from potentially finding a way to take his own life. And it's basically a way of saying you guys are barbaric in the way that you treat your prisoners.
I thought this was pleasantly good news. I completely agree with the judge's ruling here in the sense that the United States participates in torture not just by international law, but by really its own definition of it in many ways, historically. And solitary confinement, which can be used for a range of different offenses in prison, having magazines as one of them, is legitimate torture, especially if people have struggled with mental health. And can you imagine if someone brought a depression, mental health argument to a U.S. judge? I mean, most of them would laugh in their face. Like, oh, right. Please, are you kidding me? It's toughen up. We're so behind the times when it comes to this. So this is really good news. And I know that Assange seems like just a really not fun guy to be around and probably not a good person. But when it comes to the precedent that it sets, hopefully this is a good thing. And the Mexican president has, I think, offered him asylum as well.
The charges related. I mean, there's a whole set of different charges, and it's unclear to me that much of this comes from the 2016. Not 2016. That the charges do come from more have to do with 2016 than they do actually anything earlier with the WikiLeaks stuff from Chelsea Manning. But I can tell you, like, the journalistic value of the stuff in the first tranche of WikiLeaks in terms of what Chelsea Manning sent to them. I remember having this debate when I used to go on Dylan Radigan's show back in 2011. Literally, people would say, like, it's unclear what the news value is. And I'm like, today, 3 of our stories that we're talking about are from those leaks. Like, I mean, it was, people never realized how much of the news was dominated for like 2 years from stories that came out of these leaks, internationally too, not just in this country, but totally around the world. So the news value of that stuff was, I think, indisputable. And I think there is some questions, and I'm not sure in the context of, I think in 2016 as to like how involved they were in securing this information as opposed to just publishing it. And the line gets crossed when you start to actively encourage people to go and steal information as opposed to just saying, here's a lockbox, digital one. If you have stuff, we'll take it. And I don't know if that'll ever be adjudicated.
Falls on the publisher. I mean,
well, it's no. It doesn't fall on the publisher if you just say, you send me stuff and I will present it. it falls on the publisher if I say, hey, here's how you get that stuff. You go in, you do this keyword search, and then you're actually involved. I mean, that is where the line stops, right? I mean, because I think, like, in my mind, WikiLeaks, for better or for worse, is a publication. I mean, what they do is, in many respects, akin to what other journalistic outfits do. Where they cross the line, I'm not saying that they do, but where the line is crossed, I should say, and I don't think it's been established that they did this, but where the line is crossed is where you, as a publishing outfit, instead say to potential sources, here's how you go about stealing that information, or here's how you go about securing that information. You're not supposed to do that. That is then you're starting to get into a legal territory. I mean,
but the prosecution of that sets it down such a terrible precedent where the discretion is like the government can manipulate or throw the hammer down on somebody by saying, oh, you encouraged your source to do this, to find it, and it was.
Well, you need
illegal.
evidence to do that. I mean, look, well, let's put it this way. It's like, is it okay for...
The U.S. government often doesn't need that strong of evidence to use really intense...
But as a principle, right? As a principle, at what point do you become the publisher of leaked or stolen information? At what point do you become the leaker or the stealer of information? And I think when you cross that line, you don't have the same protections as you have if you're just a publisher. I don't think that I can go in and steal your emails, Emma, because I'm going to talk about them on the show. And let's assume that there's some news value to it. Like, I'm not allowed to go and steal your emails and break into your email account. I'm not protected.
But I'm not a government agency, or I'm not a whistleblower, right? I mean, I know we're talking more general terms than, the.
But now you're talking about the news value of it.
Yeah, and I think that that's important when we're talking about First Amendment protections, which is what we're dealing with Assange.
I am of the mind that your protections, and when you stop functioning as a publisher and you start functioning as a stealer of information. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't go out and steal that information. I'm just saying you're subject to risk, right? Like, because what if you go in and steal a bunch of stuff and maybe it turns out to be not newsworthy? Are you still protected? Like, where is the limiting principle as to what a newspaper can do? Can the New York Times go in and steal information? I mean, is it just, if it's okay if it's just the government? What if it's not the government? What if it's the
Pentagon Papers were stolen information.
Exactly. And Ellsberg was the stealer, and he was, the question was Ellsberg a whistleblower or not? But the Times were protected because the Times did not tell Ellsberg to go do it. The Times didn't help Ellsberg to do it. All they did is publish it. They received it from him. He didn't. It's the difference between like being,
I get it. It's also just decades ago, when now we're having online communications where someone can communicate directly with WikiLeaks or Assange, and they can have a back and forth, and potentially they could steer them in the right direction of what they want to publish and stuff. So the lines are blurry, and I think it behooves us on left media, or it's important for us to side traditionally with, let's make the criminality of this kind of publishing as infrequent as possible, and make the principle strong.
I agree with that as well. But I think the way that you protect that publishing is you make sure that the publishers function as publishers. For instance, like, I think Chelsea Manning, she is a whistleblower, and the information that she released was did not in any way hurt national security. It was information the American public deserved. I believe that her
and look at how they abused her.
And I agree. think that she was tortured. She was in isolation and whatnot. But she has a role to play in this. And then WikiLeaks had a role to play in it. And the role that WikiLeaks played, at least in the context of Chelsea Manning, was simply to publish it. They received it, they published it. And I think that they should be able to do that. I think it's desperately needed that the press is able to do that. The contention was, and I don't think is in the context of the Chelsea Manning thing, that the government was alleging that they participated in the theft of these things. And I think that how that's defined obviously is important. It should be defined in the most limited fashion possible. But I think to protect publishers, you need to stick to publishing. I mean, that's basically it in my mind. But
well, I think a bottom line here is that literally nobody trusts the American justice system to adjudicate these questions in any kind of fair and just way.
I mean, I think it's a separate question, but I think that's also the case.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're having that's a more theoretical conversation than Sam, because I just don't trust that the government is going to stick to the exact line between, oh, this publisher crossed this specific legal line. We already saw what they did with Chelsea Manning, what they plan to do with Edward Snowden.
No, I agree.
It's just, they're going to bring the hammer no matter what.
It's a little bit different, but like, look at how Gawker got just executed because they published a sex tape with news value, allegedly. And like, people don't really like to defend Gawker because that was obviously a trashy thing to do. But like, I think we gotta err on the side of defending freedom of the press and free speech whenever we can in these kinds of scenarios, because the default is that whoever has the most money wins.
Right. Well, that was a completely different. I mean, that wasn't the government. That was Peter Thiel, basically.
No, I know.
Went in and using his money to shut them down.
But like I'm saying, the default is in any of these cases, whoever has the most money and the most power wins, whether that is the government or an evil billionaire.